I'm going to claim that we should start. So I just added this on the board just a couple minutes ago because these books have been kind of floating around in my head. So I just signed up to go to a BizJam talk about tribes.
Which, of course, we're one because we're just gathering here to talk about it.
Yeah, so we have a tribe right now. And then Beyond Civilization is, I think, 6 or 8 years old. And a friend of mine just recommended that I read it. And I'm having a really hard time kind of characterizing the core message of this book like in a simple sentence. But it's done kind of interesting things to the back of my head in terms of the way I think about problems of kind of like social groupings and, you know, like not problems necessarily, but how we organize ourselves to do things. And so it's really worth looking into. It's a very, very easy read. He's got a writing style that I've never seen before where every page is like a short little micro topic. And so it's got a title and then that. And then he just kind of moves on like through the entire book, like one page at a time. Yeah. And so I just wanted to kind of see, I'm fascinated with how we are creating ad hoc groups of people to get things done, you know, and how we're changing the way our lives work a little bit from kind of, you know, big organizations like, you know, work, family, and static, kind of like work, family, and then church maybe, or, you know, some kind of organization. And now people are involved in lots and lots of different ones. And I don't know. I just kind of wanted to talk through some of that stuff. Both of these books, from a very different angle, kind of take a premise that we're headed in a tribal direction. And, you know, Mitch mentioned earlier that kind of late to that. No,
yes,
like,
that's not having an original idea.
So
he just writes well.
Yeah, and talking about what's there. And so,
by the way, Seth, if you see this, I don't mean that as an insult.
So I don't know. I kind of wanted to just kind of see what everybody here has kind of had experiences in their life about, you know, what kind of social groups are you involved in, you know, or like groups, you know, like work, home life things, and what kinds of things you're trying to get done, how you're trying to arrange your life to make that easier, what's working and not working, and that sort of thing. I don't know. Maybe we could start a little round robin and kind of go. You want to start?
Yeah. I've noticed that grouping, well, because I'm still in school, this is really obvious to me. Kids seem to do it much more than most adults. At least they do it physically. They tend to find people who are like them and then work with them. But there are some people who, you know, bullies and all that, they force their way into the top of the social order or something, which is the overall group, by making other people look weak. Like the alpha male lion would take on another lion to make it look weak so it takes over.
Do you think that, based on your experience with the adult world, that adults are less animal-like?
No.
Okay.
I just think that they do it so more subtly.
I think we've got it down to more of an art.
He does bring up a good idea, though, as far as the difference between academia and the real world. The cool thing about academia is you have random groups of people brought together in one place, where in the real world they may not have all been contained together, and so the different groups are more defined there than they would be anywhere else, because you're able to visually see this whole mass of people that breaks themselves up into little groups either by what defines them or what they all find of the same interest. Whereas in the real world, once people start going into their own houses, their own apartments, you know, in their own lives, their wives, their children, and all that kind of thing, you see a lot less of that, except what's portrayed in our arts world, TV, movies, and stuff like that. But for the most part, you see a lot less because you're so focused in your own life then that it's very rare that say you're a church-going family person that you're ever going to go out and actually see the goth club, you know, the goth kids that go to one particular club. You're not going to go to that because it's not your interest. And so I think I'm losing my point.
Groups that you're involved in right now, like very self-selected, like you kind of decided like that topic you're interested in, or
pretty much because although I would love to be that type of person that's back in college, back in school, that can just jump from group to group to group, the possibility now doesn't exist because of the fact that it would take so much time to actually be able to interact with all these groups that are very secluded now that there are, now that it's people choosing what they want to go to instead of being something that they're forced into or the next best option.
Is that a practice problem or is that an efficiency problem?
I guess it's kind of both. I mean, it's you only have so many hours in a day. How do you use them? On a college campus, you have all these different groups. They're right next to each other. But like in the city of Seattle, say if I wanted to, I wanted to go to church one day, and then the next day I wanted to go to something completely different, say a satanic ritual. They may be. I don't think they're going to be next door to each other. I think they're going to be very, very far apart. And as far as time goes, I think maybe one will be 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and one of them will be 2 in the morning on a random Thursday. So I think as far as that goes, it's a lot harder to see the definitions there with the different groups. But I don't know how this. I think this deviated from what we were talking about. Anyways,
one thing I've really appreciated about Tribes is that it's identifying your own leadership in ways that you might not traditionally think about leadership. So you might not be a manager in the organization you work for, but you might be in charge of your soccer league, and be running the soccer league that really creates community for a whole bunch of people, and that kind of leadership is really valuable. And that's really what he's talking about, is that there are all of these different ways that you can lead in our culture, and to value that. One community that I've become involved in that's really interesting in that way is the ecstatic dance community in Seattle. There are several different regular ecstatic dance. Yes, and you can go to ecstaticdanceseattle.com, and it's fun. But it's an amazing community builder. It's a facilitated dance experience that we go in. There's a circle at the beginning, and people sort of breathe for a few minutes, and they'll give the rules for what you can't talk once the music's on. Don't touch the mirrors. How to interact non-verbally during the dancing. Then the music goes for about an hour and a half, and it arcs in terms of tempo. And then at the end, we have a circle, and we talk about what our experience during the dance was. And then after that, there's a community share where people can say, hey, there's a room for rent in my house, or I'm going to teach a workshop on Rumi at East West Books on Sunday night, or whatever. And it crosses. There's all sorts of things that get brought up, and then people have parties, and people get on listservs. Now we have a Facebook group, and it's just been one of the best community building experiences of my life, I have to say. I mean, the woman who runs it is an incredible leader.
Did the addition of things like Facebook change either the size or the dynamic of the group?
Not really, and they've been really recent. The woman who runs the group doesn't have a techie bone in her body. I mean, never even did a listserv. Basically other people have ended up developing. Just literally last week, I think a Yahoo group got established, and this has been going since 2001. And there's like 1,000 people on the list now. So I mean, not on the Facebook group, but that are known to participate in this community. So it's just, so that's the kind of thing that. No, she doesn't have a political campaign. She doesn't have, this big organization that she's running, but she builds community, and she has contributed to the wellness of so many people. And all these people help each other so much. If somebody doesn't have a job, they'll help each other find jobs. I mean, there's just so many different things that it builds.
There's also the context to get it started. That's one thing I've noticed about it in Seattle. You need a context for everything, and if the context isn't there, it's like, well, why are you talking to me?
Seattle freeze.
Exactly. So like here we have a context. We're like in the structure of this event. There it's people wanting to go and dance. So I run a community office space up on Capitol Hill called Office Nomads. And it's been interesting because while I'm trying to break out of the service model and be like, well, we're not just offering services. There's still that. So there's the context. That's kind of the context. So if I remove that too much, then people are like, well, but how do I interact and trying to like really embrace people and do it. Susan and I have been running. Susan, my business partner, and we end up struggling with that problem with how to bring people into the community and get them to feel at home and make it like their office space without the context of a common company of they're there because the context is they're going crazy out of their home office or can't work out of coffee shops or that's the common context, but that's not a very easy one to point out, like dancing or geeking or whatever.
For those who don't know, what's the Seattle Freeze?
Oh, well, so there's this thing where people talk about Seattle has this polite side to it where it'll be nice to you and be like, oh, hi, I'm Cassie, blah, blah, blah. But then people won't get past that initial icebreak phrase and invite them to come hang out. So I find that in Seattle, tribes are really important, more than most places, because you have to kind of get in with a tribe to meet anybody. And if you're on the outside, it's very hard. And in fact, it's so prevalent that there's a group in Seattle called the Seattle Anti-Freeze that just gets together and does parties and stuff with the whole idea being like, you're here to meet people. So the context is there, like you guys were talking about. They have something, like a purpose that brings them together. And like you were talking about Office Nomads, it has like a reason. But if people just kind of meet you without like some kind of excuse to better become friends, people are very hesitant to here. It's kind of cliquish.
Is that different in different cities, or is that only a Seattle phenomenon?
Has anyone else lived in Portland?
Oh,
Yeah.
Portland's amazing.
It's what?
It's amazingly social.
Yeah, it's the one big difference that I've seen between Seattle and Portland, and having lived in both cities. Portland, doesn't matter. You can walk anywhere on the street. You can almost talk to anyone. You can make friends like that.
They'll invite you to a party.
Yeah, they'll invite you to a party. They'll invite you to something, an outing. I talked to a kid on a subway for on the Max for 5 minutes, and I was at his party that night. I mean, whereas Seattle,
Seattle plays.
you can maybe say hi to someone and talk to someone for 2 minutes, but then you can expect to never see that person again.
Or in New York, you can't look somebody in the eye.
It's very weird how the different cities have that different vibe to it. Yeah. So
If you look them in the eye too long, they're going to say, what you looking at? And then punch you in the face. Right?
There was a Northwest magazine from the Seattle Times article like 3 or 4 years ago that was a cover story on the Seattle Freeze, and it's the first time I had heard it, and I was like, oh, that's that thing I noticed.
Yeah.
It's very prevalent here, and I think it's just because people are so protective of their little cliques that they want to make sure you're cool enough before they like vouch for you with everybody or something.
I had a different thought. I just had this feeling that people were so overscheduled.
I think that might be it too.
I always wondered if it had any connection to Seattle going from being a small city to a big city really quickly, and especially Californians coming up to the small city really fast,
Yeah.
and the sort of the locals contracting into their own tribes and not necessarily
Yeah,
being
but
as open as
who's
other cities
local
might have been.
anymore, though?
Yeah, how many people grew up in Seattle here?
I think I
Like,
grew up,
I grew up
but
in
I wasn't
Tacoma.
born here.
But I remember when having a California license plate was actually an easy way to be alienated when you moved here.
Whenever anybody asks me where I'm from, I say I'm a refugee from California. Because of that, seriously.
So in the context of the tribes, it's been really interesting because I think a lot of that clickifying that happens in Seattle that we're really highlighting is that trying to kind of group ourselves into a context, a tribe, and the different kinds of tribes, and it's fascinating because it's so exaggerated in this time.
Well, so to what? I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Caleb was saying about the moving from one group to another in a convenient and easy way. And I just checked, and it's not in here, but there's this concept of the Dunbar number. Does anybody know what the Dunbar number is? It's the optimum number of people in a group, and after that group size is exceeded, the group would probably break into 2 or more groups.
What number is that?
I think it's around 85.
42.
That's a different one, but and I've seen. I think there's a primate Dunbar number of 150. Maybe it's the other way around. People are 150 and primates are 85. But that sounds right.
Yeah,
but we haven't
churches
changed
do this.
our Dunbar
Churches
number as a result of the use of technology, which is really to speak of. And we may have different groups that we associate with, but that hasn't meant that we individually are making greater networks of close connections.
Yeah, we when we were figuring out how big we wanted to do Office Nomads, a lot of different co-working spaces all over. Giraffe Labs down in Pioneer Square. There's 50 different co-working spaces all over the world, and they have different sizes. And we're trying to figure out, well, we want a dedicated office, and how to do that. And I kind of came up with my own Dunbar number. I've worked at a number of startups for the last 12 years, and I'm like, okay, well, at about 40, it starts to suck in. So I'm going to make it less than 40. So we have workspaces for 40. And
Could you have more than one person in a group? I mean, could, say, a company come in with 5 people and work in your space?
We could. We more cater to individuals though, because it's $475 per person. It would change the dynamic of it, because we're trying to getting people to working. As individuals, people are more likely to interact with one another. And we don't have cubicles. We have lots of nooks and crannies to move around and do. So there's already some clickification, but it's kind of already minimized just by the way that we structure the building.
And just as a side note, Giraffe Labs is even smaller. There's probably room for maybe 10 or 12 people to work actively. We have more members that are there less often. But we do have one group of 3 to 5 people that are one startup, and they've kind of just taken over a back room. It's like
Do they interact with other people?
a little bit, but they're very much in their own space.
They got their tribe.
Yeah. So, I'm wondering. So, probably all of us are members of different groups, and so you can kind of identify with various different things, and so, yeah, exactly, co-working and the like. So, where do you guys kind of see this? It feels, at least in my personal life, it's an accelerating thing, and it's I'm a part of more groups that are more important to my life than I have been in the past, and to the point where some of the kind of traditional groups work are kind of in some ways less relevant. I don't put it here, I don't talk about it. It's not my primary thing. So where do you guys kind of see this going? Over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Well, now that you bring that up, it's interesting to think about tribes within the company. Mm-hmm. So, even at Boeing, there's the tribe of the young people, or there's whatever tribe, and so it's I don't know. There's even tribes internal to tribes, I guess. That's all. That's the whole point.
Yep.
From an entrepreneurial perspective, I think that it gives people I have a 2-person business, and we really don't want to grow. But it gives us an opportunity to look at the people that are doing what we're doing and are interested in what we're doing as a tribe that may not directly have business relationships with people, but as Seth Goods talks about, we can start a movement. That we can define something that we all agree needs to happen in the future and work towards that and orient our collaboration around that. And I think that another part of the book is the tools. We have tools to do that we didn't have before, like Twitter and things that allow us to communicate in different ways. And I think that's what I'm interested in seeing, is the entrepreneurial aspect of being able to organize people in new ways in these tribes to create change or to do something that you're trying to do.
And I noticed that, because I'm still young, you asked what the future might bring to it. I think gaming and stuff is going to eventually be another form of tribeness. So people go, hey, you play this? Yeah. Are you good at it? Yeah. Go on next side, join me. Yeah. And then eventually there will be a bunch of groups that do that. And also you said that work seems less relevant. I've noticed that as well.
Your homework sure does.
Editorials are not needed here. Anyway, work. Oh yeah. It's
my fucking dad.
His fucking son. Anyway, yes. So work is getting less important to everyone. The girls are getting into more click stuff instead of working on their stuff. I've heard people say that reading is boring, which I'm like, do you read online stuff? Yeah, you're a reader. Bullshit. But, yeah. So, I think that eventually we're all going to drift into like a secondary state where work is going to be good, but it's not going to be the same work that we used to focus on. Not the same style, anyway. Like, some people think of work as like cubicle, office manager, as a pointy-haired guy, and maybe in the future it'll be a bunch of people as the boss, a few workers and stuff. And
well, what's interesting to me about this cover is there's a great deal of negative space here. You know,
Why is there so much distance between that group and
right? Well, but that is actually the nature of leadership. I mean, you're setting yourself apart. I mean, there's more than 100 people here, but if you look at the way online conversations develop, 1 to 2% of the participants actually drive the 99% of the conversation. Then another 9% of the group drives all of the rest of the conversation, and everybody else reads. And so you're creating a situation where somebody is set apart by this negative, and what is not implied by this image, at least, is how we're supposedly intermixing. And I think what we're at a point now is that we're seeing a redefinition of leadership and who the leaders are, without necessarily seeing a change in the way that people become leaders.
It's true. I think you're seeing. I think we're already seeing, and I think you're going to continue to see these two trends on an accelerated path. One is like people will find each other with less resistance, and then those groups will realize they're very different than the other groups, and you will see polarizing conflicts. You will see people have to really do the hard work of working through those differences, because there really are some big differences between subcultures, even in our city and around our country.
I think that leadership is not necessarily just a group activity. It's also an activity of connecting groups. This is a story that comes from 1991 on CompuServe, I think it was. There was a bunch of redneck guys who hung out together, and there was a gay community. And the redneck guys would go in and bug the gay community, and then the gay community would go in and bug the redneck guys. And they were really just in this online war where they would attack one another's space every day. One day, as they were finishing up, one of the gay men said, "I have to go. I'd love to continue to argue with you, you dickhead. But my mother has cancer, and I've got to go see her in the hospital." One of the redneck guy goes, "My mother has cancer too." And all of a sudden, this created a bridge between these two people, and that created a bridge between the two groups, so that they didn't have to argue constantly. They actually found other things to talk about. So when we talk about the leader and the group, and we tend to think about closure, we have to think about the loose connectors, the people who get between these groups and bring them all together. And those are really the most powerful people in society.
Martin Luther King bringing African American and white together. Silence.
No, I'm just kind of thinking about this, tendency of easier to bring like-minded people together. And I'm a database guy, so I think about it in terms of most of the way we are dealing with information right now is like making big piles of it, and then writing queries to get down to the particular thing you want, right? So if you know what something's called, like an exaggeration of it is kind of Google, right? If you know what the specific name of something is, boom, right there. You can find it. But if you don't really know what it is, it's kind of hard.
But that's why jargon is so important to group forming.
Vocabulary.
Yeah, it is, because you're creating an exclusive sense of understanding.
Yeah.
Buzzwords.
And shorthands and things like that. And I think most of the ways we have, up until pretty recently, try to do social things online has this same kind of reflection, right? Where you're trying to find people that are most like you. You've got meetup.com, you've got kind of like other ways of self-identifying and labeling yourself as certain things, and the dating sites are all organized towards like finding your match, right? Like there's this kind of deal. And at the flip side, we're all kind of craving this thing that you miss, getting out of kind of the school environment where you're thrown together with people who are different than you, and you end up learning a lot from that, or you end up crossing groups more than you were before.
And you learn how to defend yourself from other groups.
Yeah, and you kind of learn to define yourself in a way, or but you get new ideas as well. You look at most of the breakthroughs. I have this kind of personal opinion that most of the kind of breakthroughs that happen, like either science or social wise, are from people that take really well-known ideas in one area and apply them somewhere else.
Gladwell.
So that's how you get like some of that power of crossing groups, right? So one of my interests and kind of like challenges to us as we're thinking about these things forward is how do we encourage like both the kind of narrowing and self-identifying and kind of motivational, inspirational kind of power that kind of comes there, and try to minimize the polarizing effects or bad effects, and how we can create synergies between the groups or mix the groups up a little bit, or I don't know, but as we're kind of trying to wrestle with these things in our lives, I think that would be important.
I think it's interesting because technology is causing us as tribes to happen more frequently because we're finding all these keywords we can sync in on and form groups around. But we're also, as a society, claiming that diversity is so important, even as our actions speak otherwise, and we're trying to find people who are like me, who's like me, who's like me. But we keep talking about diversity. I remember, bringing up school, one of the things we did in school was, like, I was in a computer science class, and one of our big projects of the quarter they've made us do was they made the business majors pair up with groups in like the computer science majors and work together on a project, because it was like real life. In real life, you're not going to be with just computer science majors. And I thought that was a really interesting model and helped us all a lot more than your average project would. And I don't see why there's not more opportunities in life where there's events where let's take this random group and put it with that random group. Like, I wonder what would happen even if it had something in common. Like, I wonder if Ecstatic Dance Seattle got together with my swing dancing crew and see what happens. We could probably teach each other a lot of cool things. But you don't see that happening because that takes people kind of stepping out on a limb.
The element there is trying to embrace the unknown, and it's particularly interesting right now when we talk about technology and tribes, because these technologies and these social media and all those social networks, and somehow we're gonna all know everybody and everybody. Life's gonna be great. But the analogy that it makes me think of is, I think of, and this is a little bit of a jump, but I'll explain it. Synthetic lavender versus real lavender, like essential oils. Like, technology can make lavender. It smells like lavender. It looks just like lavender oil, because we've identified that really 99.9% of lavender oil is these 4 main ingredients, which we can create in a laboratory. So technology can make lavender, but it doesn't have antibacterial properties. It doesn't have any of the healing effects that real lavender oil has, which has thousands upon thousands of different compounds, which is it's all the stuff that we don't know. So
you're saying that lavender and synthetic lavender, it's like these original, the new fashioned tribes and the old fashioned.
Right. Well, it's all the elements that we get from being, all the things that we gain from being in face to face in like the real world, and all of the information that we get that we can't. I don't even want it to be pinned down to a specific definition, because you can't, like, we can make a better synthetic lavender if we knew all the myriad of different components in it. Then it would be like, no, just embrace the fact that it's more complicated, and if you can know exactly what you're doing, to understand that what tools are good for what circumstances. So when I hear these two groups that are brought together and magic happens, that's really where the unknown meets the unknown. And you can reliably know that you're going to have some really interesting overlaps just because you're embracing the unknown.
Sometimes magic doesn't happen. Sometimes you uncover bigger conflicts.
Right.
Like, you have churches in the area meeting cultures on Capitol Hill. And how do you navigate through these spaces where you're not having xenophobic reactions on both sides that say you're other, and I can't even imagine you being worthwhile to have a conversation with, or considering a different point of view from both sides, right? Sometimes it's like it's work.
It's the red state, blue state problem too.
What's that?
It's the red state, blue state problem.
Yeah,
we're super crazy out of the habit of getting along and being friendly with people that we disagree with, right? Like, and part of it is this easy, like, finding people you agree with. It's work, and it's hard, and it's painful, but like, we really, like, culturally, I think, some people are better at it than other people, but you don't talk to people who actually firmly disagree with you on fundamental issues. We have conversations with people that, like, a little bit this way, or a little bit that way, or whatever, but like really disagree with you. Extreme. Yeah, but actually have a real conversation, and maybe even still like them.
I apparently you've never been married.
Well, it's about learning.
I'm not saying don't tell Mom I said that. But that's the brother-in-law or the father-in-law problem.
Yeah.
That you learn at some point in your life. This person and I have nothing in common except for this person we're both related to. But you do get along with them, and I think that is something that when we talk, particularly as we talk about this as an industry generally populated by younger people and younger entrepreneurs, we talk about wall forming without recognizing that it's wall tearing down that makes society stronger.
Well, Twitter, for me, it's like I play around in this a lot, and I sort of hack the process to see what will happen. And so I'm really involved in church, right? And that's not very common in Seattle a lot. And one of the things that I do on Twitter is I do a lot of work life and I do a lot of personal life stuff. And people, it's kind of forces this cognitive dissonance mashup where it's like, okay, if you, I don't know how I come off, but if you think that like church people are like this and don't play around with things like this or attend conferences like this, or my friend who, is a writer and, writes spiritual books and books for Christian churches and things, he gave the opening prayer or the closing prayer at the first night of the DNC conference, right? That's a different thing, and like pushing that stuff out via Twitter is like very intentional. Oh, my friend Don, he gave the closing benediction at the DNC yesterday, and here's a video about all the flack he got from this very conservative side of his church, nationwide, for that. And here's a video of the DNC, thing. And so, like, jacking with culture like that to get people to kind of have these extended conversations is fun to see what happens and see you can get away with it without.
Only if you're out of the group and out of the flames that come off of it. When
It
it
really,
backfires.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, I've had situations where, because I may say something, people will identify me as something that, they might not hire me for a job or something. I've got a church thing on my resume, and I know, in the past, people have gone and looked at and said, I don't know if we really want to consider hiring that guy. And seriously, it's happened to me.
Do you use Twitter?
What's that?
Do you use Twitter?
I don't, but I've thought about it, but I don't know. I don't want to be that invested in Twitter.
I took the leap recently to see what turned people off.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing because I don't lose subscribers frequently, but I lose them in clumps. And they have to do with specific postings.
Religion.
Interesting.
Well, no, politics.
Yeah.
I like that, though, what you're talking about. That there's a dual argument there. One, the advancement of the internet destroys stereotypes a lot faster because the information is more available. But then but at the same time, it allows people that already have some negative image of this type of person to research you a lot quicker and just make that judgment on you without actually meeting you or knowing you. It's very contradictory, but I'd like to think and I'd like to hope that the stereotypes are being destroyed faster than the negative sides are.
And that's also the difference between information, which we talk about all the time now, and real knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we say, Brian, he's in a church, must be right wing.
Yeah.
Well, I took like religion or political preference off my Facebook profile because my entire company is on Facebook, and it seems like information, but
It's like right to one of my pet peeves right now. So like, we're just coming off this election thing, and it's against kind of like formal or informal policy in most companies to talk about politics or religion at work, right? It's like you just don't talk about politics, and it gets to this thing like we're out of the habit of disagreeing with people and still getting along with them.
We're tolerated.
Yeah, just like I know this coworker of mine. He's way out there. I still like him. He still writes good code. Don't agree.
Agree to disagree.
Or I don't know. But I think it's and institutionally we're kind of avoiding these problems, like and pretending, or not problems, but we're avoiding this and creating more problems or something.
But what I find in code is that a lot of the times we encode certain prejudices into the way that people are going to interact within the organization without reflecting on them or ever revisiting the question. And so now all of a sudden we've got a reporting structure built into our email system. And what does that have to do with the reality of today as compared to 5-10 years ago when we wrote this code?
Yep.
the work situation as well. Does I've noticed amongst my group of peers, my friends, that there's some people that will go to work, they will work 8 to 10 hours a day with the same people every day, will not associate with them outside of work. They just don't. But then there's some people that only associate with the people they work with after work and nobody else. And so that kind of that I guess that brings in another issue. It's just whether the people you work with have the same. I mean, whether you're working with these people just because you're all good at the same thing and that's it, and you really have no interest. But that's the tolerance issue. I think is what you're talking about.
Like the thing you're touching on, like it's somewhat related with neighbors, right? Like you might have like a different kind of relationship with neighbors where you're not. You're going to live next to them for a while, so sometimes you don't bring certain things up or whatever. Or I don't know if have you guys heard of the concept of familiar strangers? It's like out of kind of psychology where they did some research, like
I've realized something like that, except I've never heard of it, but I thought that name's something I've thought about before.
So the specific thing they were looking at was, like who you're more likely to ask, like what time it is at a bus stop, right? The person you see at your bus stop like every other day, or the person you've never seen there before. And their research shows that like almost like way higher percentage than you'd think, like you go towards a person you've never had any interaction with before, and ask them, what time it is, instead of the person who's there all the time, because as soon as you break that like that kind of polite, just like, oh, I see you at the bus stop, like then you have to actually like acknowledge them every day. You're creating
actually need to talk to them.
Work is required.
You can see like future social commitment by talking to this person that you like avoid. And, wow.
Danger in asking the person you're never going to see again anything, because you're never going to see them again. And I think part of like what we're talking about is who do you want to let into your tribe, and once you break that freeze, you kind of have a commitment there, because we don't want to be rude, but if we just if we skirt the issue and don't even get close to somebody, then we don't have to worry about being rude and pushing them out of our tribe.
Although in other countries, neighborhoods are much different than here. And I remember when the earthquake happened in 1989 in San Francisco, and I went outside, and I had never met most of my neighbors before. They'd never come out of their house, as far as I knew. But we were all out there, and we never talked again. But up here, I know everybody in my neighborhood, except for that one strange lady. And
the strange lady who is a
let's not
lesbian
go,
and a Republican and hates herself.
She's following you on Twitter, I'm sure.
I'm sure she is. And but it's that we're all still animals. We're all still the guys who were running around hunting and living in fur
and hitting people with clubs.
Well, yeah, but that's a stereotype. We don't want to stereotype the caveman, but Geico has done that to a degree. But that raises the ultimate question, which is: do you really change human behavior quickly, or is it simply an accretive process of constantly reinforcing the need for tolerance and engagement versus closure and security? And again, going back to the red and blue state problem, there is in this country, a group of people who really prefer security and would rather be left alone. And there's another group of people who are eager to engage with other people. And that is not going to change. It's going to change ever so little. I don't think, when we talk about utopias, especially utopias built on code and connections, we're fantasizing. Yeah, we're fantasizing about something that isn't necessarily even realistic to anticipate, and yet we invest in them because we want to change the world. So our best nature drives the decisions we make about a lot of these things, and yet our real nature is preventing us from achieving these things.
So changing human nature is still ways off.
Well, I don't want to change human nature. I like us.
So that's a kind of a fun little topic, just to go around a little bit. Name some social networking sites and things, and which of them or which parts of them do you guys think are kind of with the grain of human nature or against kind of the grain of how people tend to interact?
I have a perfect example, except it's not really a site that's social networking. It's a social video game site, Second Life. People tend to cluster there too, and I've noticed that in avatars, there's another type of thing, but people with same ideas, of course, group together, and people who are similar in their avatar style usually tend to have the same ideas.
I think though, Second Life, World of Warcraft, any of the online games, Halo, it only points to one thing: is that humans desire interaction, no matter what. Very, very, very few humans can actually survive being complete independent creatures. Cats are independent creatures.
If
But
heavy
we're not
weaponry
cats,
is involved, it just makes it that much more fun.
There you go. But that's the thing, though. It's just it proves that no matter how much we may, some people may sit at home and be very reclusive, they still desire human interaction as much as everyone else does.
That also suggests war is social.
Yeah, well, it kind of is.
That's true.
We are tribal animals.
And we like hitting each other.
Violence will probably never leave human behavior.
I think a simple one that goes against popular American culture is Bright Kite. I mean, as more non-edge case friends of mine get onto Twitter, they see me playing around with Bright Kite. The number one reaction I get is somebody will take advantage of you because of that information, and and it's an opportunity to really talk about why do you think that, and do you think privacy exists, and about the American fear culture, really. And so, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind most to me as I'm playing around with it.
Can you explain Bright Kite?
So Bright Kite,
it's place streaming.
So it's basically like Twitter except with place, right? And so there's
means.bone.
Yeah. So it's like
with pictures.
Yeah. So there's an iPhone app for it now, which makes it pretty easy. Where you can just start it, you say, "Oh, I'm here," and it will find you. You can search for "I'm at Synapse." So this morning I bright kited, "Hey, I'm at Synapse," right? And then you can cross pollinate it to your Twitters, and you can post a photo or another note, right? And so it becomes this extra layer of data where you've almost got this meta layer of here's my geographical routes. And oh wow, there's this. I had somebody walk up to me and said, "Hey, I see you bright kiting downtown, and I wanted to meet you and say hello. Maybe we can grab coffee sometime here today." That I'd never met before. I'd seen some of his posts. I live in Renton, not a big cultural tech hub around the area. And there are Bright Kite users down there. And so it was like, oh, wow. The first Bright Kite thing that I had seen was a designer up from San Francisco on vacation staying with a friend who was going to a bar that's 200 yards from my house, right? And that was an interesting thing. So it's that's it in a nutshell, I guess, in some of the use cases I've seen.
But there are a lot of people who would never share that. Just would think it was just either the government, the black helicopters were going to watch where they were going, or that somebody would get them.
There's also a cultural shift that's happening where a lot of people in our generation are starting to realize that certain things should be private, but a lot of things we don't hold so tightly to our chests and hide our cards. A lot of people I know will just publish their information about where they are, what they're doing, what their blood type is, what their birthday is. And I've been a victim of identity theft twice, and I still am one of the most easily stalkable persons in the world, but I don't care. Because any Joe Schmo can come up to you in a dark parking lot and mug you. They don't need to look on Bright Kite and be like, "Oh, she's in a dark parking lot," So.
Although, that's it because his sister has also been on Warcraft and been stalked when she was younger, and she has, I remember watching her one time when a guy went over the line and she just blocked him. And I think about that relative to when I was a kid and you went to a party and there was this poor girl who was, some drunk was hanging all over.
You can't just block it.
Right? And you can't block it. But the thing is, she has all this practice of drawing these lines in her life that a lot of people never had before. So I see that openness that you're talking about, and it's not just younger people, but I also see a different sense of what privacy and trust between members of a tribe will look like. And I don't think we've come anywhere near close to understanding that the way that we understand the mores in a normal social situation today.
And one nice thing about Bright Kite is, I was using it when I was in beta, and so you kind of knew anyone else who was on there was at least in that certain geeky tribe already. So you already had something in common if they're like alpha testing or beta testing this thing that's totally geeky. Anyway, so there's like a certain level of trust that's almost lost as the application turned into like this uber popular free iPhone app. All of a sudden, every like 13-year-old kid from down the block was on it. Sorry, and was
15.
okay. But all of a sudden, the dynamic of the Bright Kit thing.
Got exceeded.
Yeah, exactly.
The exclusivity is gone.
Comes full circle.
We're kind of like a couple minutes over, but I just want to say thanks. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we all keep kind of thinking about what comes next with, while I think human nature may not be changing all that fast, the manifestations of it, like as the tools shift around, I think is still shifting pretty quickly. So,
I got one quick question while we're all here. Does everyone know what Burning Man is?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Does everyone heard of the Rainbow Gathering?
Yeah.
Then you haven't heard of the Rainbow Gathering?
No.
It's basically this. It's like Burning Man, but it's hippies and gypsies in like a very weird. It's not as like out there as the arts community of Burning Man, but it's a very hippie. I don't know how. It's like a second family type of thing, but very laid back, earthy. Yeah,
like for a month,
earthy thing, and it's a week. And it's around the 4th of July, but it's 30,000 people. They just go camp in some national forest somewhere in the country. And so I was wondering if anyone else knows if there's any other things like Burning Man or the Rainbow Gathering that are of that national scale, because I find those things just simply fascinating as far as human interaction. These are people from all over the country converging to create these small cities for a week. And it's just
divided by tribes. Many of these have tribes that organize in advance to attend.
There's a much smaller, not national version, but there's the Okanagan Family Fair, which is a barter fair in kind of eastern Washington. Can you spell that? Okanagan.
Plus all those.
North Central Washington.
Plus a lot of conventions that happen all over.
Differently in Canada than it is here.
I was gonna say on the convention front, like every year there's PAX, which is in Seattle, but it's like I met people who came from Australia to go to PAX, and it's just like a gamer fest for 3 days where people just spend all the time together, and you really get a very strong sense of like we're all very similar kind of tribal feeling.
And there's the festival circuit all up and down the West Coast. There's the Oregon Country Fair, Ferry,
the Comic-Con,
whatever. All of that stuff.
So
there are people that just
work humans just convert out of nowhere.
People refer themselves as a neo-tribal community, and and they dress like elves and fairies, and
I love humanity. What can I say?
I dressed like elves and fairies for this thing, and I was totally when I got here, wearing my get up, I was just sorely disappointed.
Well, I definitely say this is like a tribal type of event. I mean, we've all got that geek tribe thing going. I mean, that's the only thing really that we all have in common here, because this is my first Mind Camp, and I found I was like, what's Mind Camp about? And I don't know, it's a bunch of geeks, I'm there.
I just have an observation on this geeky tribe, though. Look at how few laptops there are, out and around. Holy crap.
I think it's because it's kind of desk.
Okay, let's see how many iPhones are here.
Okay.
1, 2,
The laptops are over there.
Yeah.
They're removed from there.
But the people are interacting.
Probably because of that.
Kind of taking conferences. There's a lot of heads downtime.
Right, but those are also the ones where you're all sitting in a semicircle around something.
6.
And so you're reconnecting even in the room.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Go humans.
Someone's next to her.
Yeah.